All right, good morning, everyone. Time is 8 o'clock. I know some folks still getting treats and coffee, and that's totally fine. Just be quiet while you're out and about back there. Welcome to the Clean Lakes 101 Science Cafe. I'm Dana Fulton, our morning meteorologist at WKOW. Our station is a proud media sponsor for these events. I'd like to welcome all of the in-person faces that I see today, as well as the folks that are joining virtually on our Zoom webinar. Thankfully, we all braved the showers and storms last night. Hopefully you didn't have too many branches down on your way in. We are approaching Earth Day, and today's talk is centered around a new take on environmental conservation. It's titled Rights of Nature, and today's presentation will share how this First Nations-led movement is gaining momentum around the globe. The Rights of Nature concept proposes that ecosystems, natural entities, and even Earth itself proposes inherent rights just like humans. We are going to have time for a Q&A session at the end. So reminder, if you're joining us virtually, you can be sure to utilize that Q&A function on your screen, and we will try to get to as many as possible before the end of today. Now, before we start the talk, I want to introduce Alliant Energy's Jeff Hansen to tell us a little bit more about our sponsors.
All right, and thanks, Dana. And thanks to everybody joining here in the room and everybody joining online as well. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors of the Clean Lakes Alliance 101 Science Cafe series. First, our presenting sponsor, National Guardian Life Insurance Company. Of course, our hosting sponsor, the Edgewater. Supporting sponsors, Johnson Financial Group, Alliant Energy, Perkins Coie, and Hovde Properties, as well as our production partners, UW-Madison's Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies and the UW Extension. And as Dana said, we're happy to have KOW as a proud media sponsor as well. I'm Jeff Hansen. I'm Director of Environmental Services and Corporate Sustainability at Alliant Energy, and I'm also a proud member of the Clean Lakes Alliance Community Board. I'm happy to serve that beginning this year, and I'm really proud of the acknowledgement or the progress and developments that the Clean Lakes Alliance has done for the lakes and the lands that surround them. Alliant Energy has a proud tradition of supporting the Clean Lakes Alliance and wishes to acknowledge all the fine work again of the organization. And much like our lakes, Alliant Energy is in the midst of a transformation to a clean energy partner. While acting on our clean energy vision, we are now the largest utility solar provider in the state of Wisconsin. And just last weekend, we hit a milestone of putting 1,000 megawatts of solar energy on the grid at one time, which is quite an accomplishment for us. Thank you. Now, just a quick update. Registration is now open for a popular Loop the Lake bike ride taking place on Saturday, June 15th. All participants receive a super soft shirt compliment to Land's End, a meal at one of our many food trucks at Olin or Old Brick Park, and of course, because it's Wisconsin, a complimentary beer at the end, courtesy of Wisconsin distributors. The ride, which goes around Lake Monona, is family friendly and with kids 10 and under, riding free with a paid adult. Now, before we start today's talk, I want to introduce Clean Lakes Alliance Executive Director James Ty, who will tell us a little bit more about today's speaker, as well as the organization.
Thank you, Jeff. And for those who do not know, Alliant Energy is one of the founding organizations of the Clean Lakes Alliance, and it was their vision many years ago with their foundation to support our effort. They also made a wonderful $100,000 gift several years ago to help us restore the prairie out at Pheasant Branch, turning to what was over 100-acre farm into a platinum prairie. So those seeds are there and growing into a prairie. But the other thing, through our volunteer days and other volunteer days, those seeds are being spread throughout the watershed so we can restore and protect our lakes. Today's Clean Lakes Alliance 101 is part of our DeJope initiative, a partnership with the Ho-Chunk Nation to spark and sustain a cultural movement to care for our lakes, lands, and waters. Through our To Drop initiative, we aim to honor and bring awareness to the perspectives of Indigenous cultures. We recognize the sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation and are excited to continue and nurture our relationship and deepen our partnership with the Ho-Chunk Nation and its members. And now I'd like to take a few moments and have you watch the video that we made in partnership with the Ho-Chunk Nation as part of last year's breakfast.
We've called this area home for thousands of years, but the beauty was created thousands of years before that. Let's travel back in time, way back, before Wisconsin was a state, when the United States was a country, way before Greek and Roman empires, and even before Ho-Chunk arrived to the sacred garden. We're here in Greater Madison, 15,000 years ago, but we're not standing on the ground. We're on top of a mountain, ice up to a mile thick. This is the Wisconsin glaciation, and it covered most of Canada, the upper Midwest, and New England, but a thaw is on the horizon. Over the next 2,000 years, we will witness the big glaciers start to melt and retreat. Where we once stood on ice, large lake stretching from present day to stone. Enter humans, 13,000 years ago, when we see the first human activity occurring around the shores of these waters, but the lakes hadn't divided yet, meaning distant ancestors of Ho-Chunk dwelled near a large single water body, later named Glacial Lake Yahara by geologists. But more changes come. 10,000 years before present, we see water levels fall, separating into 4 current lakes and even shallow water marshes, including one that would later be turned into Lake Winnipeg. Along the area of the Ho-Chunk called Dejo, which translates to 4 lakes, early surveyors document the Ho-Chunk producing 3,000 bushels of corn annually in old turf, 4 lakes, and Broken Arm, now known as Middleton, Madison, and North. At the center of Dejo, much like today, sits Lake Mendota, now known as the most studied lake in the world. The lake was once called Wakshay Uminga, translating to where the person rests. Dejo was a cultural epicenter for native mound building peoples, with evidence of over 1,200 effigy and burial mounds documented in the area, a concentration that rivals any other place in North America. The water is sacred too. The Ho-Chunk, with its massive ancestral land base throughout present-day Wisconsin and reaching areas of Canada and the Dakotas and into present-day Indiana, know that water has identities, the life, a meaning and a purpose. Yeah. Right. Preserving the utmost care and protection. They rely on water for fishing, wild rice harvesting, and transportation, but also treat it with a spiritual reverence as a living entity that provides so much to the people of Dejo and beyond. That important relationship with water has lasted centuries and has kept the Ho-Chunk Nation from its traditional clan duties to its modern day government as protectors of one of the most important life resources. This is why the Ho-Chunk pour tobacco for the water spirits. In return, the water protects the people. It's been 13,000 years since humans first congregated here. The future holds promise, but perhaps the past can offer lessons to how we develop relationships with our lands and waters. As we move forward to make our lakes better, we must also look back and draw upon the lessons learned from the Ho-Chunk, who knew the protection and reverence to the water would in turn lead to a thriving community.
Well, what a wonderful way to start off the day. That video is something we should all be really proud of. It started with a simple conversation talking about the Monona waterfront. And that's where I met Sam. And right away, we had a beautiful coffee later after that with Caitlin, our engagement manager, and Paul Dearlove, our deputy director and chief science officer, at 9 a.m. At 11:45, I said, I've got to go. It was right away. Sparks were flying between Samantha, the Ho-Chunk Nation, ourselves, and the Clean Lakes Alliance. And we're really proud to have a formal partnership through a piece of legislation with the Ho-Chunk Nation. And it's my pleasure to introduce my friend, soon to be my sister. I get the chills every time I watch that video, but I'm excited to introduce Samantha, who was our keynote speaker last year at the community breakfast and a dear friend of the organization, and again, to me. She's recently become an equity partner in Patterson, Earnhardt, Reelbird, and Wilson LLP, and previously served as an elected associate justice for the Ho-Chunk Supreme Court. She's a longtime advocate for indigenizing Madison, as she pronounced last year at the breakfast, and advocating for laws that protect our lands and waters. Please join me in welcoming Samantha.
Good morning, Heidi P. How are you this morning? Great. How many folks here went to the keynote address last year? Good, and you came back for more, right? All right, well, I am going to deliver more to you. Thanks for coming back. And thank you, James. I just want to mention that in just a little over a year when I met James Ty, so much has happened here in Madison. So many good things have happened here in Madison. Again, the sparks flew in our forever elongated coffee date with Team Clean Lakes Alliance. Got to meet folks from the board, different people in the community that for whatever reason, after living here, over 25 years, I haven't met yet. And we have forged a strong partnership and allegiance here as community members and as I think civil servants to this community to come up with solutions, and not just come up with solutions and talk about them, but just as in James Ty fashion, just act on them. So I just want to give kudos to Clean Lakes Alliance on making good on their partnership with the Ho-Chunk Nation. Thank you, Clean Lakes Alliance. Thank you to the board. And especially thank you to the sponsors. We forget to talk about folks that are funding these causes, that believe in the work and the initiatives and the partnership between a federally recognized tribe and a nonprofit organization, which, quite honestly is pretty rare. And it's special for DayJob. It's very special that we have this partnership, and it's very special that our community and our partners in business decision makers believe in our mission and invest in our mission. Otherwise, these things are just not possible. So thank you to Alliant Energy and all of the partners and sponsors today. And thank you to the board from Clean Lakes Alliance. And thank you to all of the folks that support Clean Lakes Alliance. I know there's hundreds and hundreds of you, and I'm deeply in debt to you and excited for the work going forward. I think we have hit, the pre-phase of development of how we can really pivot here in Madison and kind of delve into some of the things out there that are actually doable for our DayJob community and beyond. So I want to present to you a very abbreviated version of what is going on with this rights of nature movement. Certainly, just as a disclaimer, and not as a legal disclaimer, which I'll get to in a minute, but as a disclaimer, the rights of nature movement is a massive, massive global movement. I would think that anybody in this room is probably not the people that have been asleep at the wheel, not knowing this has been going on. I think there's been folks in this room, if you care enough about the environment, you got up this morning, if you had to work, you made arrangements to be here. And folks that are online as well, you made those arrangements as well. So thank you for your contribution and your sacrifice of your daily schedule to come and see what's going on. So I want to just say too, the rights of nature is massive. It is on all levels of jurisdictions. It is happening in ways that aren't even written. It's been happening for thousands and thousands of years, and these things are in rapid development. So keeping your eye on the prize and keeping your finger or your gauge on the pulse is very difficult to do in 2024.
I would say, 10 years ago, when this movement seemed to be taking more of a public shape, it had already taken many other ways of private and quiet shapes. So we are really kind of opening the can of worms here on what is really the lay of the landscape. And that's really what I intend to do today, is really share with you what it is we're seeing, what are the trends in the movement, what is the successes and what are the failures in the movement, and what does that mean for our community? What does that mean for Dejob? What does that mean for the players, the community mortars that are here, the actors, the movers, the shakers, the sponsors, all of us in partnership? What do we agree on is best for Dejob? I will say, though, that because of the diverse nature of the rights of nature movement and all of the players, there are players on every level. There are youth-led initiatives, there are PhD dissertations, there's work at the World Economic Forum that I'm going to share with you later. All levels are broaching this movement and how is it taking shape? How should it take shape? What are things we need to know as community members and decision makers for our community? So I cannot vouch for everything that is in this presentation. I spent an amazing amount this weekend revisiting all of these websites and resources, some of the, the resolutions, the decisions and the judgments that are included. What I wanted to do was provide you as an audience wanting to just jump into rights of nature with a PowerPoint that had active links to credible websites with real resources that, you could read easily and find easily in an organized way. So that was my effort with this PowerPoint, and all of you are welcome to it with the active links. But I can, of course, those are not my links. Those are not my organization. So I cannot claim that any of those are accurate or authentic. Those are things that, that is on you. But I did the research I could cursory and wanted to provide this to you and want to just disclaim that as well. I do work at a law firm, as James mentioned. Since we've been working together this past year, I've had the fortunate opportunity that I could not pass up to join a native-owned law firm named Patterson, Earnhardt, Reelberg, and Wilson. It's based out of Louisville, Colorado, right between Boulder and Denver. This law firm is made up of, 20 attorneys, most of which I've known for decades, that are diehard Native attorneys working for Indian country. I've partnered and seen them on the Hill many times as I've lobbied for tribal interests and advocated for water rights and other things for tribal clients, and they are top-notch. So I'm so happy to join them and open our new Madison Midwest office. So we are going to have an office here. We do have an office here as of February in Madison on East Washington. So very excited that, we are planted here, and we're going to be doing good work for Indian country and of course our communities as well. So let's dive in. What is the rights of nature movement? There are all kinds of definitions out there. Again, it's a global movement, so it means different things to different people. From what I'm seeing from my perspective as an Indigenous attorney and an advocate for folks, and not necessarily just for tribal organizations and entities, I'm seeing that it's a global movement to protect land, natural resources, by enacting laws that declare that nature has certain legal rights. What it also does effectively, and this is maybe not so much in the public view, is that it codifies tribal, traditional, and Indigenous ecological knowledge. So again, as we saw in the video, Representative Robert Pilot kind of touched a little bit on this old experience, this human experience in connection with the land. Those are learned experiences, right? These are things that the Ho-Chunk Nation, its clan systems and its duties and its responsibilities have carved out and perfected over the years. There is traditional ecological knowledge about the lakes and this land that we're sitting on right now that could be tapped into and used and updated. We could plan that with science. We could do whatever this community wants to do with that information and start working on advanced stewardship, taking the science that we've learned from these lakes. Of course, again, these are very heavily studied lakes, blending that with traditional ecological knowledge and really learning and soul searching for ourselves what it means to be real stewards of this land and level up the playing field on inherent rights to nature. So codifying them, which means, we do have to broach the record holder. Who holds this information? These tribes and these elders and these clans here at Ho-Chunk own and they are the gatekeeper for that information. So that said, our very first conversation with Clean Lakes Alliance was, let's forge a partnership. Let's build trust in a relationship so that information can flow both ways. Obviously, Clean Lakes Alliance and all of the different entities that have studied the lakes and have watched the trends of the lakes. We want to make sure that we have all the information in front of us to make decisions on how to pivot and move the lakes into a cleaner, safer, healthier environment. What else does the rights of nature do? The rights of nature movement also reaffirms, declares, or otherwise extends equitable rights and relief to nature. So the rights of nature movement is not just legislating. We are hearing from judges on the bench. We've seen a dissent in the Supreme Court from Justice Douglas back in the day during the Sierra Club case that really extended and disagreed with the outcome of that case because he believed that certain pieces of nature have certain rights, inherent rights, and that we need to accommodate those when we look at cases and controversies. So this is, again, not too new. There are opinions, beliefs, and systems coming from all avenues, but generally, these are the three things that I see facing us here at Dejo. So what is that movement based on? The movement's based on certain principles. And certainly when we all gather and talk about rights of nature, I worry, are there folks in the room that are here that are, opponents or will continue to challenge laws that are environmentally friendly? We certainly always look as a lawyer and as folks looking at things that threaten our environment, threaten traditions and cultures of different Indigenous groups across the country. And I've had the experience of working for over 30 tribes across the country, and I still represent tribes in multiple states. Hearing their traditional ecological knowledge, their stories behind closed doors, I have to say their fear and their concern for the environment is tantamount and it's paramount. And keeping watch and being the watchdogs and having the resources it takes under the current legal regime is very, very, very concerning for them. We look at things like the Clean Water Act and the Environmental Protection Policy Act. We look at tribal rights in participating in processes that actually harm the earth or do irreversible harms and damages to different portions of our environment. And we look at those laws and quite honestly, typically, and this is a conversation I have with my clients, I typically say that law is going to fall short and you probably won't be happy with the outcome. And these are real conversations lawyers have with their clients about, client goals to protect a certain species, protect a body of water, protect a sacred site, or just protect a viewscape, just nature generally as a whole as an ecosystem. So the principle that comes behind all of this is really getting everybody together to think about and being in a space, a mental space and a spiritual space of connectedness, of coexistence, and thinking about what does it take to coexist with each other, with other companies, businesses, neighbors. What is it like in your neighborhood? That dynamic, that very dynamic of you walking out and down to the park and down to the lake right now, which is sitting right next to us. What does it take for you to connect to that space? And are we so far removed, in our culture that we are unable to connect to that space, right? And sometimes, in my experience, I feel like folks that are disconnected really are challenged with talking about how do we view that lake? How do we view the value of that lake? And I'll talk a little bit more about value in a minute. But really, ultimately, there are some very, very stable sets of principles that I see universally when we look at worldwide municipal and tribal rights of nature movements. I see some same principles rising up, and these are as follows, that now is the time. Now is the time for us to act. In fact, it probably was yesterday. In fact, it was probably 50 years ago, but now is the time. We are looking at critical species loss, right? We are looking at 100 to 200 species per day disappearing on this earth. And I could sit here and spout out all of, the climate change and the species issues and the water quality issues, all of the volumes of lawsuits on Clean Water Act, all of the lawsuits on contaminated water, cancer, healthcare concerns. We could talk about those, but unfortunately in 40 minutes, we don't have time to talk about why people are resting on this principle that now is the time. Now is the time. And I will say from my own personal experience, I lived in Phoenix for 5 years and I practiced law in Arizona. I frivolously studied the water system. Now it's very hard to go from Wisconsin to Arizona, although everybody says it's popular, right? We go down there as snowbirds and I love to golf, so I go there as much as I can to golf because you can golf every day. But I also had a child and I also watched the water from the Central Arizona Project pipe my water in open corridors, concrete corridors, in warm weather, and that get piped into my house. And I also worked with a toxic tort attorney in litigation when we were analyzing air and water quality standards in Arizona and within the whole Ninth Circuit. And as I learned and saw the evidence and the experts talk about what was in the water in my community, I learned really quick that I was bathing my child in chemicals and medications that could not be stripped out of the water. We're talking cancer drugs, birth control, and I was dunking my child and soaking them in the bathtub for 30 minutes every couple of days and just letting them soak in the water. And it just horrified me. It horrified me. And I thought, why are we living in a city that doesn't have water? And why are we living in a city who doesn't have a water solution? And I thought, I really don't want to live here with my child anymore. And back to Madison, right? Where there's lots of much better water. And I certainly, when I moved back and I purchased property, I looked at our well system here in Madison, which well had the best producing outcome, cleanest water. That's where I want to buy my house. And that's exactly where I bought my house. I based it on the trends and the cleanliness of our water system and our well system here in Madison. So that's my own personal experience. And saying that, there is, again, that puts myself right square in the middle of this principle of now is the time to act, right? Why are thousands and millions of people living in that circumstance? And oftentimes it's getting worse. And what are we going to do here? I'll say one more secondary experience is that I have done an amazing amount of work in water law. I have clerked for the United States Department of Justice, where we litigated water rights on behalf of tribes. I was lucky enough to be able to brief 7 of the 42 issues that involve the Klamath tribes, right? If you've read the news where Yurok is blasting down their dams and returning their salmon back to their natural migration patterns, I highly encourage you to check out what they've done with the outcome of that lawsuit. And it makes me very proud to know that, working and fighting on behalf of water rights for Indigenous peoples means good things for the environment. It's a wonderful story. I currently am working on water rights settlement legislation for tribes that don't even have rights to water, where the United States government went in lobbied or gave it away legally through the judicial system, and they have to go back and fight for water, just even having water, get along water quality, right? So in these experiences, it tells me that now is the time, and that there are certain aspects of our legal system after nearly 20 years of practice and working in a space where, working alongside colleagues that are challenging existing American law, challenging, the popular, consumerism culture and the popular property owner culture, and quite actually, not doing so well. And we think, well, maybe there needs to be a paradigm shift in the law. And maybe I've experienced it enough to say that it seems like this is more of a viable solution for our country and particularly our local communities. I think it starts at the community level. That said, looking at how do we come up with a solution to get our environment back in check? How do we balance these ecosystems that are severely out of balance, that are causing these species losses and causing us to get ill as human beings ourselves? How do we do that? Do we build off the existing legal system as it is, or do we develop rights? The very essence of a movement is all about rights, right? We talk about the movements, all the movements in the history of the United States. They're all about taking rights away or extending rights to something or somebody, right? That's really all the movement's about. So rights of nature is really that movement. It's extending rights to nature. And what is nature, right? It's what matters to that community. It looks like, the early phases of what we're seeing in the trends is that it is the lowest hanging fruit. I hate that word. I hate that, that phrase, but it is really true. What is the lowest hanging fruit? What is it that we need to address in short order? And we look at that resource and we start working around that resource. We look at the laws, the jurisdiction, the enforceability, the symbolism of even passing the Rights of Nature Declaration. And we work that way. That is what most of these communities are doing, and that's how they're succeeding and moving things forward. Ultimately, when these communities across the world are soul searching for solutions, they are all agreeing that the right solution for our world is to extend inherent rights, certain rights to nature. And again, that might be nature as a whole. It might be an ecosystem. It might be a region. It might be a species-specific piece of nature. It may be a body of water. It may be a river. It may be a cultural site. So there are all different ways that communities have broached what is nature and what are our principles in moving ahead with rights of nature. We also talk about a little bit about that evolution of the modern day property and consumer rights. Again, those are not sustainable to our world. Does anybody know how much time we have if we continue on this pathway? Right, and I challenge you to look that up. to look at your resources. Look at your resources in your own community. How much time under the current policy framework do we have to exist the way we are living today? That is a challenge for you to look at. And then your next question is that sustainable? Is that sustainable? And your third question is, can we build off of that and make it better? Or do we have to start with, again, a revolution of extending rights elsewhere? We look at rising temperatures and sea levels and other climate change realities. From the Indigenous perspective, we know that that is a huge problem. We are seeing massive losses of, flora and fauna that Indigenous peoples depend on. And when I say that, we think of, hunter-gatherer, historic time. These are current times. These are times that Indigenous people right now are not going to the grocery store. They're going out and they're killing turkeys and deer, eating buffalo, and they're foraging in their own lands, and they're eating and living off those lands still today. This is not yesteryear. This is today. So when we have these climatic changes that affect those Indigenous peoples from living their lifeways as they have for thousands of years, it's very real. And when you go to these homelands of these Indigenous folks and you see how they cook, live, store food, cultivate food, you will see that they are largely dependent on how the climate is working for them and with them. So these climate changes are having serious direct impacts. Now, the rest of America may not be living their life that way, right? We may just go to the grocery store or to the butcher, right? We may have a different place to hunt and gather our food, but it doesn't mean these Indigenous peoples aren't doing that right now as we speak it, and right down the road from us, as a matter of fact. It is really happening and is really affecting their food sources. So their big concern, as I mentioned earlier, is massive. Finally, we need to look at one of the other main principles is how is it possible to actually pass a rights of nature? Who has the authority, right? States have authority, the federal government has authority. There's some authority internationally under international law. But also we cannot leave out, and we must pay attention to the sovereignty of tribal nations. We have over 500 tribal nations that have a federal tribal relationship here with the United States. And they have aspects of their sovereignty that allows them to make laws and be governed by them. There is certainly challenges to enforceability of some of those laws, but that's an enforceability issue for all jurisdictions under any law. It's nothing different for tribes, and it's nothing unique to tribes. It happens at every municipal level. How many times have we seen our Wisconsin DNR rules be litigated, or we've seen the state of Wisconsin be litigated on their authority as well? These are always challengeable situations, right? And so they're no different for Indian country. It is just another tool in our toolkit to think about ways to sustain our environment and use this tool of sovereignty, tribal sovereignty, to everybody's benefit. So there are a few more principles I want to talk about, and I've mentioned this, that the tribes have a legal standing as political sovereigns, political states. And certainly, I want to make this really clear, this is not something that the United States during its founding days extended or gave to tribes. This pre-existed contact. There were hundreds and hundreds of tribal nations within the United States upon colonial contact. And in fact, our Constitution is built on those treaties. And people say, oh gosh, the treaties are old, let's get rid of them. Well, you can't. They're codified in the United States Code. Indians are mentioned twice in the Constitution. We are the very fabric of the United States, right? Tribes are the very fabric of the United States. And recognizing them as sovereign states before the United States was formed, before the Declaration of Independence, is very well kept in the national records. I would welcome everybody to visit the National Archives and look at the background on how our Constitution took place, how it was derived from the Iroquois Confederacy, and how it was perfected, to the best of its ability at the time. I think that's really important to make sure that we understand the political status of tribes and that it came long before there was the United States, and it exists still very much today. Now, it doesn't mean, though, that tribes have a full set of sovereignty tools, right? It doesn't mean the Ho-Chunk Nation can come in here and cite you and arrest you, right, as non-tribal members. There are limits to that sovereignty, and there are limits to sovereignty with the state. There's limits to sovereignty with the federal government. And it is a jurisdictional mess, I would call it. And that's why you need lawyers. And that's where I get to work. It's also important to know where the state has authority and where the state doesn't have authority. Certainly, I've worked many, many times with the state of Wisconsin, its Office of General Counsel, its attorneys along different divisions and departments on various projects. And to my wonderful surprise, I'm always excited to hear and learn and work with my colleagues from the state on discovering ways how the state has authority to do X, Y, or Z. Right? There are things in our current statutes that do allow us to do certain things. And exploring those is really part of the game, right? Exploring those and agreeing on how those could work in this regime is something we'd want to do. In the end, though, the question, an elephant in the room, is what if we don't do this? And again, that goes back to the original question, is looking into this yourself. How much time do we have? What is sustainable for us under the current policy framework? And that's the elephant in the room. What if we don't? What if we don't? And Indigenous peoples, they have stories, they have prophecies, just like any other group of people. And if you hear some of these prophecies, as I have had the privilege to hear, you will see that if we do not change our ways, that we have a chance to change our ways as a society. If we do not change our ways, nature will come running for us, right? We're in a different place here in 2024. We are experiencing a global pandemic. Were we not humbled and brought to our knees in the last few years about really our human state of affairs? How fragile we are as a species, right? How our government works and doesn't work in such times of crisis. We are definitely in a different place than we were 4 years ago. And I just want to remind you of that reality and that humility that we all gained in the process and through the processes of dealing with a massive pandemic. I thankfully was on the phone the other day with wonderful deans from George Washington University. They have been leading many causes and they have and when I say leading causes, I mean they've been doing it through education. They have worked very hard in environmentalism. They have addressed rights of nature. And I had some calls with them on another matter. And one of the things one of the professors brought to light was, and I put the elephant in here because it's the elephant in the room. What if we don't do this, right? What if we don't join this movement? And one of the deans mentioned, hey, there's a paper that was written a few years ago about the value of nature. And this is something I've been broaching the last 8 or 9 months and really delving into is we run into consumerism, right? We run into property ownership culture. And there's a lot of money behind that, right? There's money and there is wealth and there's legacy. And those are hard things to deal with. That's really the elephant in the room that we have to deal with, right? And so I think, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the financial and where's the economic piece to the rights of nature? Where is it evolving? And one of the things that we have had to do, and I've had to do as an advocate for Indian country, is to work with the state government, work with the federal government, and try to convince those decision makers that there is value in the environment as is. There is value in this traditional cultural property. There's value in the sacred site, and there's value in those human remains, in those effigy mounds, those conical mounds, those linear mounds. There's value in the medicine that's in the ground. I have to convince folks that know nothing of that world that those things have value. And so in terms of economics, how do we engage our World Economic Forum? How do we engage our local economists? How do we engage the business school, Marquette, to go and look at the value of water, the value of our species, the value of our trees, the value of our ecosystems? What is the modeling behind, and we can model anything for value. That's one great thing that we have in consumerism. We learned how to slice and dice values, right? How do we apply and build the methodology in valuing the culture, right? And so in this conversation with George Washington deans, I learned that this paper, The Value of Elephants, a pluralist approach. And I love that word pluralist. It means we are not going to look at this from one dimension. We cannot just look at one-dimensional valuation systems anymore. And that's what got us in trouble in the first place, right? Isn't that the way? We didn't have a worldview. We didn't have a value system or a methodology that gave us more information on the short and long-term values of nature, of natural resources. And in this approach, they were talking about the value of the elephant in Africa. And who has been on an African safari here, right? And some folks have, one of the values is hunting, poaching, ivory, right? This is a long thing we've all heard of way back in elementary school, all the way through current times. So this country had this dilemma in front of them. Is the value of tourism and hunting elephants and ivory, is that the true value of elephants in our world, because that's what it's been for decades, right? How do we start sitting down with economists and coming up and doing a paradigm shift into a pluralist approach? How do we look at this from a different angle? What is the value of the elephant in the ecosystem? If it's removed or it becomes extinct, what is the value to the rest to all of the other living creatures in the ecosystem? What is that value? And so I included a link on here for you to explore how one of the first, innovative approaches to building methodologies on this goes forward. And again, I mentioned earlier that the scope of nature, rights of nature law, really depends on what this community wants and needs, what it sees as low-hanging fruit, what it's willing to back and support and come up with solutions. So there's a process to this. There's certainly a process to figure this out, and many communities are certainly somewhere in the midst of this process. How does rights of nature law work? Well, I think it might be clear from my earlier conversation, but in the United States, I'll just talk about the United States because that's where I work. Nature is treated as property. It's property. Nature possesses little to no rights for itself. Current environmental laws fall short of minimal protection. Nature is unable to advocate for itself in the prominent adversarial systems. So we've adopted adversarial systems from Europe into our judicial administrative processes, and nature can't come forward with an attorney and advocate for itself. It doesn't speak English, right? It doesn't file motions. It doesn't file complaints. Who can do that for them? Why do they not have the authority to do that? Anybody in this room and I can go walk down the street and open an LLC here in the state of Wisconsin. We have an inherent right to sue and look out for our best interests today. How is that possible? But nature, what we depend on, nature needs everything we need. It needs healthy water, a clean environment, stewardship. It needs the ability to grow and regenerate itself, to recover and heal itself. It needs all these things to feed and to take care of us, right? We are living on the premise that nature will continue to do that for us, but we do nothing to make sure that they have those rights as well. Unlike incapacitated humans, and we already have a system in place here. We have guardian wards, we have adult incapacitated people, we have minors, we have children, right? Children can't go make legal agreements among themselves unless the court has ordered them to. We already have this in place. And so these are systems where we can qualify people as guardians to look out for nature. Generally, when nature suffers damages, and it has to suffer damages just like any of us in an adversarial system, we don't have a case, we don't have standing if something hasn't been hurt, we won't be able to get into court. But in the case under current American law, when you pollute Lake Mendota, Lake Monona, or Lake Wabeesa, when you pollute a private property and you have caused some damage or harm to the private property owner, the company, or somebody who has a consumer or a material right, that is who gets paid in the end if there's relief. The river, the water, the lakes don't get that. The fish, the species within, they don't get that relief. Unless, the human being who receives, or the corporation who receives the money, puts it back into the lake and restores it and tries to reverse some of the damage. But typically, as you and I both know, they don't. They keep the money, right? They keep the money. So they are never made whole. And under the law, if you suffer damages, the whole idea of justice, and that's why I have my justice medallion on today, is that you make them whole again. You undo the wrong. So how does it work? Rights of nature shifts the paradigm from that reality to something a little different. Here it declares, it recognizes, it affirms, or it sometimes even reaffirms that species and ecosystems have inherent rights. The law affords certain rights. So if you pass a law, whatever that law says is the inherent right that will be recognized by that jurisdiction, right? So it can be across the board, a Bill of Rights, for example, which is an all-encompassing, civil rights medium, like a very basic standard, or it can be higher rights, right? So it's whatever the jurisdiction decides, but it means that you have to have suffered harm to get into court, and you have to defend that case and win that case for that species or that piece of nature to recover. So the role then shifts from a concept of property to the concept of this being an independent living entity, which has certain rights. It has a right, often you'll see this in the language that I'll mention in a minute, a right to exist, to thrive, to flourish, to regenerate, to restore itself, to heal itself, to recover, and to carry out its functions in the natural world. Those are the rights we're talking about here. And again, the process is to consider bringing on people that are qualified guardians to stand up for these rights. And certainly when there's an award for relief, that it goes back to nature and not to another human being. We don't have time in 40 minutes to talk about all of the movement pieces, but I did include them in this PowerPoint for you, as I mentioned earlier. I will say that there are multitudes, dozens and dozens, global illustrations. And I would point to you to look at the 2017 Maori tribe of Wanganui, who worked really hard with the British Crown in a treaty, and they reinforced that in modern day law to give the rights of personhood to their river and also to their forest. That's an amazing, massive, impactful event on rights of nature. We talk about the Galapagos Island, we talk about Bolivia, we talk about Uganda, in India, and sometimes these national laws, and this is the United States passing a law for rights of nature. Can you just imagine that? These are what these countries have done. They've changed their constitution. In Ecuador, massive proportions have supported the change in constitution to protect their natural resources. So I invite you to click on all of these links and explore some of the language and the passage rates and some of the news behind some of the media behind these massive global movements. And again, big swaths of land, big chunks of resources that will have an absolute impact on our world. Now, municipal, here we are, Madison, right? I want to put this up first. There has been a long, I think there's over 30 efforts for municipal governments to go and pass a rights of nature law, mostly around water, right? Water is generally almost square one with most of these jurisdictions. So again, I invite you, I will let you know that in 2023, the Milwaukee County passed a resolution supporting the rights of nature movement across waterways and bodies of water in Milwaukee County for the protection and ensuring human activities do not interfere with nature and its ability to be healthy. We also have here in Wisconsin, the Menominee tribe, which I'll move on to here. Menominee tribe has also passed the rights of nature. And I will also say the trend is towards water, towards fish, and also against some big, huge player in the corporate world, typically mining and fracking, that are causing, again, big impact changes to entire ecosystems. So again, low-hanging fruit. That's what the community has discovered. That's what they've taken on. That's typically the trend. So here's our tribal nations. There are a number of them. Ho-Chunk Nation, of course, even they're not on this list, but they passed one as well in 2015. That got revisited last year, and the nation is now currently exploring what rights of nature law it will be focusing on. So they're in that process that I mentioned. So please click on these and look at some of the low-hanging fruit from tribal nation perspectives and what they're doing about it in terms of their sovereignty. And again, I just want to make sure that, and I mentioned this earlier, that the tribes certainly enjoy the sovereignty, just as, there's sovereignty within the state of Wisconsin and sovereignty elsewhere with Indigenous peoples and groups. And these are some of the cases, if you like reading old 1800 Supreme Court cases like I do, because I'm super nerdy. I reread these. I probably reread these like probably 80 times, but really talking about why did we get in this mess in the first place? These are the seminal cases. These three cases say, we're going to look at the doctrine of discovery. If we discover it, it's our property. If we have property, how much of the interest does the tribes have? And what's our relationship to empower tribes with their political status? And this creates all of these things. This is the foundational law for property. So every lawyer in the United States has had to have taken property law and has had to discover and go through these cases and pass that property law class to be a lawyer. So they do know the foundations of property and the doctrine of discovery and where this came from the British Crown and how it was morphed into American law and why we ended up where we ended up in terms of environmentalism. I will let you know that at the end of the day, that with all of these overlapping, there's some overlaps of jurisdiction, there's some court cases that don't reconcile with other court cases. It's very complex, and that's the world that I live in and trying to sort these things out for jurisdictions. There is questions and complexities that we all need to broach as we move ahead with rights of nature. I won't spend a lot of time, but I also want to point you out to the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration for Indigenous Rights of Indigenous People. There are 11 provisions within the articles that lean towards supporting rights of nature or outright talk about the connection between Indigenous peoples and their property, and the right to their property and the right to sustain their food, as I mentioned earlier, food and sustainability. So I wanted you to make sure that you were aware that the United Nations has already taken up this connection between Indigenous peoples and our environments already. That's from 2007, so it's nothing new. And then I want to just touch on the last few minutes. What are we expecting to see with this rights of nature movement? We will see the emergence or re-emergence of traditional ecological knowledge. right? I mean, don't we, wherever you live, want to know what is the ecological knowledge? What's the blueprint for Dejope? What has been working for this community for hundreds of years before our visiting, our domicile? What goes on here? What should be going on? You will also see dozens and dozens of rights of nature laws passed on national levels, municipal levels, tribal levels, and other levels. They will keep coming, trust me on this. Likewise, you're going to see an increase in rights of nature coalition building. That's already happening. Nonprofits are building, reaching out across the globe. There are folks here in the United States going that were paramount in other countries' development of these national laws. You will also see, as I mentioned earlier, a rise and uptick in research and development. So we talked about methodologies for valuing nature. You'll see all kinds of things of what's working, what's not working. We are going to slice and dice this movement as it moves ahead. We're also going to get pushback, right? We're going to get pushback from corporate America. We need to anticipate that as well. We are going to see some jurisdictional hurdles and challenges come our way. But we will also see the next generation popping up. They're actually leading this cause. A lot of the causes, a lot of the tribal causes are led by tribal youth. They are coming up with resolutions, approaching the tribal councils and making action happen. So we are seeing that as well in our tribal communities and also in our municipal communities. We are seeing kids step up and ask for solutions and demand solutions of our older generations. Give me one more minute. What does that mean for our community? That means that we are wonderfully positioned, in my personal opinion. We are wonderfully positioned. We have a culture of sustainability. It's been here long before I was, probably long before you were. We also have a very democratic process here in Dejope that's very unique to us. It doesn't happen elsewhere. I've lived in other cities. I've dealt with different municipalities, behind closed doors. And I have to say, we're not perfect. We're not absolutely the best, but we have the ingredients to go ahead and start exploring rights of nature here in Madison. I included some links for some resources here that will be helpful to you from Bioneers, which is the nonprofit that I work for and help tribes, help educate tribes on their opportunities to do rights of nature. And there's other links here, George Washington. But I do want to leave you with one thought before we go. This is out at Hudson Park, which includes a bunch of mounds off of Lake Monona. I was just out there the other day, and I typically do rounds to all of the mound sites in Madison as one of my hobbies, just to make sure everything's okay. And while I was out 2 days ago, I took this picture of Harry Whitehorse's sculpture, and there's going to be a Harry Whitehorse sculpture event in June. But I wanted to point this out because this was a legacy. This is a hackberry tree that was hit by lightning, and Harry Whitehorse, who would sit on his original Ho-Chunk allotment out off of Broadway, in between Broadway and the Beltline, where all that wetland is. That's the old Whitehorse allotment, original Ho-Chunk allotment, right? The last one of some of the last living Ho-Chunks on the original allotment. Harry Whitehorse is the legacy to that. And he carries that traditional ecological knowledge and would sit in his backyard in the wetlands, and he would carve and draw these animals that frequented that wetland space that we drive over on the Beltline all the time. And what he did towards the end of his life is he gave this tree new life. And he, as homage to our tribal traditional ancestors, he captured the images of these life in this tree, in this piece of tree, and it's been erected at Hudson. It looks over Indian Mounds and Hudson Mound Park. So if you have a chance to visit that, I want to make sure you saw that full circle connection of traditional ecological knowledge and that legacy that I hope stays there long after we're gone. I also want to bring out one thing of traditional knowledge for Ho-Chunk. One of the things that I learned was that we have a way of our lives, and this is 20 seconds, I promise. It's called Wagichide. Wagichide means that you love one another. And if you explore the language, our language at Ho-Chunk is so beautiful. There's no English words, and I've tried to translate things in the past and miserably failed. So I will just say, in my own sad way of using words, and even as a word doctor myself, it's loving something more than you love yourself. And that's how you carry yourself every day, all day. And that's how the Creator smiles down on you. When you care about everything beyond yourself every day, that's living in the Wagichide, the Hidushka, the traditional way of Ho-Chunk. And that translates directly into rights of nature. We have a song called Love One Another Song, and it's Wagichide Wide Adino. And I've been singing this song since I could barely talk. It's saying love one another, they say. Hidushka Wajuka, Wa Iuno, Erino, sounds better when I sing it. The good people, the creator said that, they say. So that's the good people that live in that way. And that's all I have for you with my short time. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm happy to answer questions.
All right, Sam, thank you. We have just a few minutes for some questions. I think James does have one you want to start off with, or?
Thank you again, Samantha. It's always great to get a worldly perspective from you. One of the things I've learned with you was an effort, and your cousin was John Greenberg was here, that we learned out of 9 years about your cousin with the fish out in Massachusetts and how rights of nature helped those fish. Do you want to do that little case study, explain people like the on the ground of things of what rights of nature can do for those fish, and maybe tell a little about that story? I think it would be just a great way to end.
Oh, that's my favorite story. It's the most recent story. In fact, I just got back from Sacramento from the Pioneers Conference 2 weeks ago, and all of the Mashpee youth that led that movement for the Mashpee Band of Wampanoag, which is the original people. So we talked about the Pilgrims, right, and the original contact. The Wampanoags, which have now bands in Cape Cod and on Martha's Vineyard. This is the Cape Cod group. It's the Mashpee Band. The youth had formed an environmental advocacy group as a youth. They just on their own volition created their own advocacy, and they again sat down as a group of youth and said, "What is the low-hanging fruit?" And they said, herring. Our people have the old stories that those kids have been hearing since they've been young, and even their parents and their parents' generation, is how the rivers ran black with herring. And herring was the most abundant food source. It kept the people alive year-round. It was an amazing food source. But what they learned then, that we and the tribe has known for quite a while, is that 96%, this is the tribe's data, 96% of the herring is gone in the town of Mashpee, in the original homelands. 96. So they're still netting the last 4% when they need to for that community, that tribal community. So the youth stood up and they drafted a resolution. They presented to tribal council, unanimous approval last year, that they are declaring a state of emergency for herring, and that they are attributing the main cause is that it's European standards on how to construct the runs of the herring, where they go and spawn, which they come from the salt water and they go up these ladders, and they go to the fresh water, they spawn and they come back down. Well, these were all historically done naturally, right? Through nature. The indigenous people knew how to maintain these ladders so the fish could make it up the ladders and back down. And then it would be black for them. They would all be constructed and replaced with hard concrete. And I went out there 2 Aprils ago and watched them. It was terrible. The fish would jump and hit the concrete and look like they're knocking themselves out. Some would die. Many didn't make it. This is where you have 96% loss of a species in one community. So the idea for the youth was that we will raise the money, we'll get our community behind us, and we will work with the town of Cape Cod, the state of Massachusetts, and we will find a way to deconstruct these concrete runs and we'll replace them with natural runs. And so they are raising the money, they are looking, the town is all on board, and we will be replacing those runs and restoring that herring population for their community.
Wonderful, Samantha. Thank you so much. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, so we're going to wrap things up for today. Again, thank you. If you didn't get to your question, or if you do have anything virtually, you can always shoot us an email, info@cleanlakesalliance.org, or make sure that the question does get answered by one of the really wonderful folks with Clean Lakes Alliance or through Samantha. This entire presentation will also be on YouTube tomorrow if you do want to rewatch anything or share this information with everyone else, so everyone else can learn about all of this wonderful news that was just shared. Make sure our next meeting will be Tuesday, May 21st. It's going to be an afternoon Clean Lakes 101 Science Cafe, and we're going to be discussing our recent State of the Lakes report. So keep an eye out for that, and keep an eye out for the 2024 Greater Madison Lake Guide. It is going to be in the mailbox the first week of May. For the lake, I will be there on my track watering, so join in. It's going to be a fun day. So thank you everyone for joining. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.